So thanks for Dr. Goltz, you being here with us. And you were saying you think that people will be kind and gentle and not freak out.
Well, Cindy, I think that there's certainly good news in terms of public response. I think we look at the public as potentially being very passive and dependent on our government agencies and our official response, but people respond pretty well in a crisis. People are more resilient than we give them credit for. Those very people whose homes will be damaged in a large earthquake are going to help their neighbors. They're going to share food. They're going to help them if they're trapped in debris. They're going to do a lot of things that we think they might not do in a big earthquake disaster.
Because I don't see people helping their neighbors always on the freeways. All of a sudden.
The freeway may be a different story. But there is certainly a human tendency to pull together and help one another in a disaster. I think this has always been the case. It's pretty much hardwired into our genes that we do need to help one another survive when there's a big crisis.
So tell me, Dr. Goltz and Dr. Jones, I mean, this really is a communication, a mastering of communication from the state on down in terms of how we will all connect and be able to calmly work our way and survive through this thing. What is the chain of command, and how does the communication flow so seamlessly when the big one happens?
An important factor that how we've structured this in California, or in the United States, is it's a very bottom-up system, so that the fire chief on the ground responding to the first incident is completely empowered to take whatever action he thinks he needs. And when he needs help, he turns up and calls for help, and that brings in the upper levels. And it's a system that's worked very well in terms of empowering individuals at the disaster to take action, while quickly getting in help from above when it's needed.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Goltz?
There's good coordination, as Lucy said. Most of our immediate response is going to be at the local level. That's where the equipment is. That's where the staffing and manpower is. But when a disaster overwhelms a local government, our agency can bring in mutual aid from other levels of government, the county, the state, and of course the federal government through the Federal Emergency Management Agencies also going to be very active in the disaster. So we have good integration of government function in a disaster, and one of the things that I'd like to point out is that the very large earthquakes that have been mentioned by John and Lucy, we've developed catastrophic earthquake response plans based on those scenarios, one for Northern California, and we're just finalizing one for Southern California as well. So we're trying to consider, our planning, the very largest earthquakes we could potentially have in the state.
So you guys are all about the worst case scenario.
Well,
I mean, the best in the worst, right?
Yes.
Plan. Hope for the best and plan.
Yeah. And so where is the worst place to possibly be should this worst case catastrophic event happen?
In a bad building. And I think that's it. There will be some of the strongest shaking will be near the fault. And the bad news in California is that we have a lot of different faults, and we don't know which is going to be the one in the next earthquake. The good news is that those faults break up the crust and make it a poor transmitter of energy. So you don't have to be very far away from the fault to have a very little shaking where you are. And the bad news is when you're right on top of the fault, it's a lot worse than even a little distance away. And we just don't know which is going to be the fault in the next earthquake. The San Andreas is a likely candidate. You can find a location of that easily on the web, like earthquake.usgs.gov, or look for the California Geological Survey. And those, the San Andreas runs the full length of the state, and if you live right next to it, you better be sure you have the best possible building.
So to this point, is the latest thinking, both Dr. Goltz and Dr. Jones, that earthquakes are kind of like people. If you hold your stress inside, someday you're going to really blow. But if you let it go and you exercise and do things to let it out, eventually it's not going to be as intense. Is that how we still kind of look at?
Well, no, there's the faults. There's no way of letting off the stress without the earthquakes. That seems to be a characteristic of faults. There are some faults that release all the energy in small earthquakes, but there's nothing we can do to change a bad fault into that type of fault.
And if we see more frequent little earthquakes, that isn't necessarily a good sign.
No, I like to say that when you have a lot of earthquakes, you tend to have a lot of earthquakes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And once you're having events, it means that you're more likely to be setting off others. We do seem to go through more active and less active times. And actually, the last 15 years since the Northridge earthquake, aftershocks died off, we've been in a particularly quiet time compared to the long-term history. So don't think that the last 10, 15 years is what the future's going to be like in L.A. On the long run, we need to have more earthquakes than we've been having.
So, Dr. Goltz, in spite of all of this seamless coordination, and I mean, you guys are living and sleeping and breathing this constantly, and really, you guys are all like family because I hear you're in daily communication, up and down the state with everyone in terms of, who is right on the cutting edge of how to respond to an earthquake. But isn't it true that we still can't rely on you to help us necessarily? We might have to fend for ourselves for a long period of time.
Well, I think it's always good to be self-reliant. And I think that there are a number of things that one can do to prepare for an earthquake. First of all, obviously you have to know what to do when the shaking starts. And one of the things going on this week, as you know, on Thursday, is our shakeout drill. And it's important to emphasize that you really do need to know how to respond to an earthquake. And I think there are some myths and there's some realities about response. We recommend that people get under heavy furniture. We don't recommend people get in doorways, and we certainly don't recommend that anyone run. So those are some of the things that we're looking toward in terms of public preparedness. Of course, there's also the issue of storing water. Water is going to be a very big issue in the earthquake. Food, having a fire extinguisher, a first aid kit, and the other supplies that are recommended. Very important.
Mm-hmm. What if we're in our car, though? I mean, I know we want to slow down and pull over, but then we just stay in our car?
Definitely. If you've got a big enough earthquake that you even know that you're in an earthquake when you're driving a car, it has to be pretty bad shaking for you to perceive it while you're driving. And if you slow down, pull aside, but stay in the car, because the car itself can be thrown around by the shaking. I actually was talking to people in Chile, somebody who, against advice, went to run out of his building when the magnitude 8.8 happened last winter. And he got to the front door and opened it, and he saw the cars being thrown around in the street and realized he couldn't leave his building because the cars were a danger.
Mm.
Yeah.
I'd like to follow up on that by saying there have been studies done that show that the more you move in an earthquake, i.e. running, the greater the probability of injury. And so I think that it's very important to emphasize that people should not run during the shaking of an earthquake. And sometimes the tendency to do so is strong, particularly among people who might have children also nearby that they run to. Not advised.
Mm-hmm.
There was a woman who died in the Northridge earthquake running to her children.
Oh,
she didn't do them much good.
Oh my! What a fix she must have been in,
Yeah.
Well, all right.
The child was fine.
Yeah, good.
Make it.
Well, stick around. We have more to talk about here on our special edition of Home Wizards Earthquake Safety as we work to get you ready for what's coming up on 10/21, which is this upcoming Thursday at 10:21 in the morning. Wherever you're going to be, how will you respond? Because as you've been hearing from these experts here, Dr. Lucy Jones, Dr. Jim Goltz, you don't want to run. Will you instinctively know what to do when it happens? This is your chance to practice it, to drop cover and hold on and do whatever you need to do in those moments. So keep it here because we have more great advice and some more experts to help us, including an L.A. County fireman who has been to Haiti. He was there on September 11th recovering bodies from the collapsed buildings. He'll tell us more of his insights next. Here on Home Wizards, I'm Cindy Dole. Don't you go away.
When the really big shaking starts, will you know what to do? You're listening to a special edition of Home Wizards, Earthquake Safety with Cindy Dole.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for sharing your Saturday afternoon with us because we're getting smart on earthquakes. This upcoming Thursday is a very big a day. It's a chance to go through the drill of what you would do wherever you are should the next earthquake happen. And it's on 10/21 at 10:21, and so to kind of get us ready for that, we have the entire show dedicated to this. With me, Dr. Lucy Jones, seismologist with the US Geological Survey and Caltech, and Dr. Jim Goltz, who is with the state, with the manager of earthquakes and tsunamis. Dr. Goltz, are we going to have a tsunami?
Well, a tsunami is associated with the displacement of the ocean floor. So we have had tsunamis in the past. There was a very large earthquake in 1964 off the coast of Alaska that generated a tsunami that killed about a dozen people in Northern California. Since that time, we've also had a number of earthquakes around the Pacific that have generated tsunamis. None have caused fatalities in California, but there has been damage as recently as after the Chile earthquake earlier this year.
And the fact that when I looked at the pictures, the old historic 1964 pictures of Alaska, the streets, I mean, they look like they've turned into craters. Dr. Lucy Jones, is that going to happen here?
Probably not, but it's possible. What happened, that wasn't the fault opening up. That's something called liquefaction. And it's where if you shake a loose soil and there's a lot of water in the soil, it temporarily becomes quicksand and just flows out of the way, and it can be responsible for a lot of damage. The good news is, have the earthquake in November and the water table's really low, probably we'll have less of a problem.
All right. Well, speaking of weather, people can't predict it has no association with the weather, the earthquakes.
No, there isn't. What you will find, though, is every culture in the world has a tradition of earthquake weather, but the weather that they say is associated with earthquakes is the one that they had at their most memorable earthquake.
Mm-hmm.
People want to make a pattern of it because it's less scary.
Sure. Well, Dr. Lucy Jones, what's the website you'd recommend people go to?
Earthquake.usgs.gov if you want to get the science of earthquakes, shakeout.org, and earthquakecountry.info for how to prepare.
Mm-hmm. And you, Dr. Goltz, any others that you like?
Well, we link to all of those from our own website, which is www.caliema.ca.gov. But I would agree with Lucy that those are very good websites to go to. There is a Shakeout website, as Lucy mentioned.
Yes, and we'll be talking with the Shakeout folks momentarily. So thanks, you guys, for hanging in with us this Saturday and make us smarter. And I don't feel quite as nervous now having talked to you both. So thanks, okay?
Well, thank you for taking on this topic. Everybody needs to hear it.
Absolutely.
True.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, both.